Season 8 has made a lot of new heroes stronger without making too many of the recent meta staples too weak. There's a ton of new more viable ways to play, and with it new ways to solo carry for your team. But even though there are a lot of strong heroes, not all of them are perfectly suited for carrying your games. For example, Brig is a great hero, but there's not much you can do if your teammates aren't doing anything with the extra protection and pocket you provide them. I'm looking for heroes that can take the game into their own hands, and after the most recent patch there are definitely some new and improved options compared to previous seasons. Here are the top 6 solo carrying heroes for Season 8, starting with Ramattra. Normally a brawl tank like him is one of the less reliable carrying heroes, and it's true that in Nemesis form you definitely depend on good healing to keep pushing forward, but this patch finally made his Omnic form way more dependable to make up for it. Even without the patch, Ram's damage type, the spraying beam of projectiles, is actually one of the best types of weapons of the game. Projectiles allow you to not only reliably spam long range, but at closer ones you can really rack up headshots thanks to that bigger projectile size. The weapon already had a lot of ammo and a pretty fast reload. It's only gotten better after the pure damage increase and aforementioned projectile size buff. Omnic form being banner makes it a lot easier for Ramattra to delay using his Nemesis form. You no longer needed to fully commit to the fight, and it even works as a defensive ability to stay alive after taking a super aggressive damaging position. You can totally switch things up. Usually you would be using your shield and Omnic form to get up close to deal your punching damage in Nemesis form, but now you can do the opposite. Obviously just the extra 100 armor in your Omnic form doesn't mean it should be used for brawling now, but it's definitely serviceable enough to go for kills without using your Nemesis form. Honestly, just your staff alone is enough to actually force a lot of tanks away, which is ideal into heroes like Roadhog and Junker Queen who deal a ton of damage to your Nemesis form. Now all of that does make him better, but how does it allow him to carry? The answer is that now finally Ram has way more coverage with all of his different abilities. He has Nemesis form to kill backline, his staff to pressure tanks, and his vortex to slow and catch flankers or other aggressive DPS. It's a really good mix of being able to push both tanks and backline. A hero like Winston, even with his armor change, is still really limited to only backline, so it's really valuable to have the option to be able to do both. And Ram is a rare case where he not only can do both, but does both really well. A solo carry tank has to have win conditions beyond just spamming the enemy tank, but also needs to not be easily countered. Ramattra fits the bill easily, making him the first tank on the list. For some more in-depth guidance to these heroes, make sure to use the link in the description to get access to a Game Leap membership. With a variety of different courses from different coaches, there's a ton of coverage for all sorts of game knowledge. I mentioned earlier that the best overall heroes aren't necessarily the best at solo carrying, but Kiriko pretty much covers both bases. Kiriko is not only a top support this season, but she also has solo carrying potential across her entire kit, and her kit is a pretty stacked one. But carrying as a support is pretty different from damage and tanks, since most of your job is just supporting your team. Kiriko is one of the few supports that actually has an aggressive neutral, but she also manages to support her team in engaging and impactful ways. We're not just spamming heals at our tank like Baptiste. Kiriko's kunais and all the mobility she has to put herself in a position to hit those kunais make her unbelievably good at taking duels. But dueling doesn't always have to be aggressive, like looking for picks on the enemy backline. Don't get me wrong, you should totally be doing this all the time, pushing for headshots before and in the middle of the fight, whenever your team's not dying of course, but dueling defensively is also an option. Kiriko can't win every 1v1, definitely not against tanks, but she does have a particular advantage against flankers. She kind of is one herself, so she's pretty much just the top of the flanking food chain. But anyway, check out flanks and rotations that the enemy flankers can use to get onto your backline, and look to mark those flankers ahead of time to completely shut down their plan. It might seem like a lot to juggle: healing, peeling, spam damage dealing, and now dueling both aggressively and defensively, but in this patch a lot has changed to make her better at multitasking. Her healing projectiles fly faster, making her more responsive even at longer ranges. It's also pretty easy to manage who to duel with. It just relies on the map you're on and the heroes you're playing against, information that's made available to you instantly and 15 seconds after the round starts. And of course, she also has the tide-swinging behemoth ultimate that is Kitsune Rush, definitely in the top 2 team buffing abilities in the entire game. Having a broken ultimate is pretty helpful for solo carrying, so Kiriko definitely fills out her spot on the list. And of course, we have to go over the best carrying DPS heroes, and who better than Tracer, who's finally become strong enough to really start owning lobbies again. When Tracer is good, she's really good, in a pretty all-encompassing way. She farms tanks, supports, and either wins or just escapes any duel. She can still be countered. Torb and Kiriko are pretty good options, but having just high burst damage and high mobility gives you a lot of options to avoid those counters. Now, not everyone is going to log on and become the best Tracer overnight, but the state she's in right now is pretty nice. Simply just dealing regular, effective damage is already pretty powerful, and if you actually engage and look for one clips often, you'll find them a lot easier than before. And unlike Reinhardt or Pharah, you don't need a specific composition or complementary hero to get the job done. She's obviously a dive hero. Alongside Genji and Winston, they're literally the signature dive heroes of the game. But you don't need a dive tank or even dive targets to be an effective Tracer. Just fighting duels for space and picks around the map is already a massive advantage for your team. You can also play for defensive dueling just like Kiriko, marking a flank or pressuring the enemy tank before they engage. But not every hero needs to be a jack of all trades with a pulse bomb or Suzu in their pocket. Anna may be a popular hero, but she definitely doesn't have as bloated of a kit as Baptiste or honestly even Kiriko. Despite that, she's one of Season 8's best picks, and the reason is just one single ability: predictably, her Biotic Nade. It's always been strong, but recently it's really starting to feel more oppressive. and there's actually a good reason why. Most people would guess that it's just because of tanks like Roadhog and Mauga having all of their self-healing shut off, countering a major part of their literal tankiness. It's true, but it's not just tanks that heal themselves that suffer from the anti-nade. It's really the tanks that can't block it that are always going to be struggling. Sigma and Orisa were just meta, but they both had ways to block and absorb the nade both for themselves and their team. Now that they've been forced out of the meta, heroes like Junker Queen, Doomfist, and of course Roadhog are more viable, but they will just not catch that grenade for you. Ana's nade isn't just good for focusing tanks down, but also for throwing behind the enemy tank to hit a more impactful debuff on the enemy backline. Just that alone makes Ana a lot better in Season 8, and your nade usage is what makes the real difference. What you can do to carry outside of your normal healing playstyle is to work on going for more aggressive and deeper nades, and at the same time being very careful about enemy divers and their positions so you don't get ambushed without your nade to heal yourself with. It's the same counterplay as it's always been, but this season you get more rewarded for accurate anti-heal hits, so it's way better to use them more aggressively. Ana still has more ways to carry your team, like shooting backline to help pick them off, or hitting a clutch sleep dart on an enemy ultimate, but right now your Biotic nade will make the most regular difference. For the next solo carrying DPS, I am legally required to say Sojourn. She's still the best damage hero overall, and who's better at solo carrying than the hero who snipes out railgun shots one after the other. Even with the headshot multiplier decrease on a railgun, it's still very much worth it to go for headshots. It leaves 200 health targets at merely 5 HP. Just one projectile or even sleep dart impact damage will finish them after that. Her primary and secondary fire alone are perfect for carrying her team, but yeah, it's what she's already been doing for at least the past 3 seasons. Most players are split into 2 categories, those who play Sojourn all the time and those who don't at all. She is really strong, but you definitely have to like the player and grind to hit more shots to get the most out of her. The best way to carry is to just hit your railgun shots, although honestly that's not that hard to do. Even hitting just body shots only is still pretty effective, as long as it's not just only on the enemy tank. But the good thing about Sojourn is that even if you're not carrying, you still have pretty decent damage output. If you're not hitting railgun shots, it's not going to be as good as Soldier 76, but it's still good enough to farm most tanks. And good disruptor shot usage can actually make or break teamfights by how well it can split the enemy team. But all in all, Sojourn's railgun shots are the real carries, and you can get a lot of mileage out of them if you get more into playing her. Obviously, a super popular hero like Sojourn doesn't need more players insta-locking her, but she is just that strong. Even her ultimate just maximizes the power of her already existing railgun shots. It kinda shows just how strong the base ability is, and the rest of her kit keeps up easily. And lastly, for the final best hero for solo carrying in Season 8, although she's not as broken as Sojourn, she's getting pretty close to it. Junker Queen with her scattergun buff is pretty menacing. Carrying as Queen extends to every ability she has. Commanding Shout, Carnage, Jagged Blade, obviously her ultimate, and her mid-range scattergun that's been made even more effective. Because almost her whole kit is super strong, there are a lot of ways to manage different situations without having to swap your hero. Just speaking alone on what you can do with the new scattergun, the distance at which you can do maximum damage has been comfortably increased. If you've been hitting your shots as Queen this patch, you can easily tell how good it feels against heroes like Tracer and Kiriko, who used to be way too skinny to care about your pathetic shotgun blasts. But outside of that buff, all of her abilities combined give her probably the most decent coverage for every composition in the game: rush, spam, and dive. And she's great both for pushing the line forward or holding the corner for all of them. Her scattergun and knife are perfect for focusing down dive targets or pressuring a bulky spam frontline. Her knife and axe are great for pulling someone towards your team to collapse with a brawl or counter an aggressive one with a 5-man slash. Even her commanding shout can work to peel your team against an enemy dive. 50 bonus health and a 3-second speed boost that can't be dispelled is pretty good for escaping anyone pushing you. Even the fact that she has the only other anti-heal in the game besides Ana makes a pretty good case for how flexible she is, and that's basically the theme of the video. With how many different styles and heroes are viable, it's pretty important to pick out the one that can consistently make an impact on the game, and by now the game has amassed a pretty good amount of stacked heroes that are less counterable than others. That's it for the top 6 heroes for solo carrying in Season 8. Ramattra and Junker Queen, Sojourn and Tracer, and Ana and Kiriko. Even putting all of them in the same composition, whether it's Ram or Queen, makes for a pretty good team. Basically every base is covered, except for maybe a defensive support ultimate, but you don't need one if you have a full pocketed tank at the front line, railgun shots consistently flying, and 2 flankers pressuring all parts of the map. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.